Okay, welcome to part two. So this is my perspective on when I came to Indonesia and what I think is different from my country compared to Indonesia. So question number one is, when I arrived in Indonesia, how did you adjust your time in the first week living here? Wow, that's a big question. First week arriving in Indonesia. Well, because such a big time difference, literally from where I live in Toronto to fly to Indonesia is about halfway across the world. So the first thing that hit me in the week was, jet lag. I was very, very tired because it's 12 hours difference between Canada and Indonesia. So when I'm waking up, everyone's going to sleep in Canada. That was probably the biggest one. I suffered jet lag for a long time when I first came here. Probably took me 2 weeks to get over that. The second thing, the heat. Yeah, it's very humid here. The heat is similar, 35, 36 degrees. It's the same in Canada, but the humidity here is up to 90, 100%. And in Canada, it's maybe 50 or 60%. So I think the thick air is what hit me the second hardest because it was hard to breathe, and just walking maybe 1 kilometer from my hotel to the train station took a lot of energy. So I'd say those are my two top things that affected me when I first arrived here in my first week. Number two, how do people greet each other in Indonesia? Does it differ from Canada? Well, it differs from place to place in Indonesia. So yes, of course it differs in Canada. In Yogyakarta, where I'm living presently, a lot of people bow, especially the older generations. You meet someone, you might say something like "Monggo," which means please, or please pass, right? They usually bow if you're meeting someone in the older generation or someone who really wants to show you respect. So that's very different in Canada. We don't have that kind of tradition or custom where we greet people like that. It's usually just a handshake or just waving and saying hello or hi. And then, I think that's the biggest difference for me between Canada and Indonesia. Number three, are there some common gestures or body languages that ever caught your attention in Indonesia? Yeah, here in Indonesia, a lot of people only greet you with their right hand. They consider the left hand to be what would you say, like the dirty hand or the wrong hand or the devil's hand in some people's opinion. So if you're left-handed, you don't want to greet someone with your left hand. You always want to greet them with your right hand. Whereas in Canada, they don't really care which hand you offer for a handshake. So that would be the biggest one, as well as the bowing. Right, that's very different. When I first came here and I noticed that, I was like, why are they bowing like that? Like, for me, I thought maybe like martial arts or something. Like, that's what I know from karate, like you bow to sensei. But here it's a sign of respect and camaraderie. So yeah, those are the first ones that caught my attention when I started living here. Number four, what do you usually keep in mind when interacting with locals? I try to keep in mind my language because I'm still learning, and here in Yogyakarta, they speak Javanese. And I try to learn a bit of Javanese, and then my wife is from Jakarta, specifically Betawi, so I don't know Betawi very well. So when I'm going through different parts of Indonesia, I try to keep that in mind. Maybe if I'm in Bali, I greet someone with abang or bli. And if I'm in Bekasi, I greet someone with abang for a man. And then here in Jogja, you call them mas. So I try to keep that in mind when I'm traveling between different parts of Indonesia. Usually the language. Number five, what are some common customs or traditions in Indonesian households that may differ from those in Canada? It's a good question. Those are some big differences that I noticed when I first came here. So the first one was eating with your hand. It's a very local custom to eat with your hand, especially when you're in the small restaurants. Not many people do that in Canada, unless you're at a very ethnic restaurant. Maybe you're at a specific Indian restaurant in Toronto or in Vancouver. They might encourage you to try and eat with your hands, where is in Indonesia, it's a very local custom to eat with your hands. And actually, I prefer to it. I've become accustomed to eating with my hands too. It tastes better. Next one is, you always got to remove your shoes before entering someone's house. I like this one as a show of respect. You're not bringing anything dirty into someone's house, whereas some people in Canada, I mean, we kind of do that in Canada as well, but some people will just walk into your house with their shoes still on. So I like that one. Number 6. Do you know any Indonesian superstitions? If so, which make you gasp the most? Yeah, this is pretty funny. So they've got lots of superstitions in Indonesia, which are funny and sometimes scary. So the funny one that I can recall that my wife told me about is when young girls are helping their mothers clean the house, if they don't do a good job sweeping the floor or mopping the floor, they'll get an ugly, bearded, hairy husband. That one makes me laugh the most. And then a recent one that I learned when I was traveling in Bali was about the barong, or they call them layak as well. So they say to young kids that if they don't go home before the sun goes down around 5:30, 6 o'clock, if they're not home by that time, there's a big scary monster with a very, very creepy face, and he's full of hair, and he's dancing and he's making weird noises, and he scoops up the children and takes them away. So that one made me gasp the most. I thought that's pretty scary to tell your young kids, but I guess if you want to be careful with your kids and the stranger danger sort of thing, you tell them the barong story. So that one makes me gasp the most. Number 7. You must have tried many Indonesian foods by now. Yes, I have. Is there any food that you think is unique or unusual? I don't know. I've traveled quite a lot, so maybe for some other people, they would think it's quite unusual. Here in Indonesia, like a lot of other countries or developing countries, they tend to use as much of the animal as they can, right? So smaller restaurants or warungs, they call them here, they sell like chicken intestines and organs that are not very common for us to eat in Canada. It's kind of what we use for animal food in Canada. But here, they do it very well. The local tradition has been doing it for hundreds and hundreds of years, so they do a good job on making those items tasty. Goat is quite popular here in Indonesia. A lot of people like to eat goat. It's not such a popular dish in Canada, which I really like now. There's a dish called sate klatak, one of my favorite dishes. So yeah, those are kind of the unique and unusual ones. The next unusual one is fruit, durian fruit. Not many people know of that fruit, or maybe they've heard of that fruit on Food Network television. So that's the stinky fruit, where it's not allowed on the airplane, not allowed in taxis or buses or hotels or apartment buildings. That's one of the most unusual fruits I've ever come across in my life. It's very, very pungent smelling. Some people says it smells like rotting onions, or it smells like poop, or smells like pee. So many people have described it like that, but I don't know, once you get past the smell and you try it a little bit, it's not that bad, but it's still quite unusual, very, very weird. Number 8. With the difference between Indonesia and Canadian foods, how do you think you adjust your palate or taste with Indonesian food? Like I said before, I've traveled quite a bit, so I don't have too much difficulty adapting to different foods. I just find what I like and I eat it. A lot of people are quite surprised when they ask me if I like spicy foods. A lot of my friends who are Indonesians say that I have a higher spice tolerance than they do. So I haven't had too much trouble adjusting to it. I really enjoy Indonesian food because there's a lot of variety. So if you don't like one thing after you tried it, you can try another thing. And it's kind of endless with what you want to try. If you live near to the ocean in Indonesia, there's so much unique seafood to try. And if you live inland, they do a lot of different things with goat and beef and chicken and then pork if you're in Bali. So yeah, it's kind of endless. So it's not too difficult to adjust. And then if you want your Western foods, it's not too difficult to find. All right, coming to the last couple questions. Number 9. How do you familiarize yourself with all the cultural shocks in general? Familiarize myself. I think the biggest culture shock I had when I came here was traffic. I've been to other countries. I've seen a lot of crazy things and amazing things. So Indonesia, when I first came here, I wasn't too shocked by the different culture. I was ready for it. I was excited for it. But the traffic is probably the craziest thing that I had to deal with as a culture shock, and that I still have to adjust to today, because traveling between different provinces, the traffic can change quite differently. The roads can change quite differently. So I'm always constantly adjusting that and preparing for those kind of surprises on the road, because sometimes you'll have all of a sudden goats cross in front of you, or you'll have kids running across in front of you from school. Or maybe it's Friday and everyone's coming out of the mosque. So you have to be very prepared when you're on the road. And that was the biggest culture shock for me. Whereas in Canada, the roads are quite straight and you can basically predict that nothing's gonna happen when you're driving. Maybe it's the weekend, you get a crazy drunk driver being on the road, and that's all you really have to worry about. Or if you're in the countryside, like where I am, in the nighttime, deer like to cross the road. So those are the biggest two things that you have to familiarize yourself with when driving. Compared to Indonesia, you got about 100 things going on at once. So that's the biggest thing for me. All right, last question, number 10. What are some landmark or tourist attractions you might want to visit in Indonesia? This is a long one. I could talk for a long time about this. I think the first thing that brought me here, because I like to study history, was to visit the site of Gunung Padang, which is near to Sukabumi in the west side of Java Island. So that's one of the oldest pyramids, carbon dated at the moment. That's an amazing tourist site to see. It's not so well known, so I would suggest that one. Here in Yogyakarta, one of the reasons I moved to this city is because it has beautiful beaches everywhere. And you have so many old temples, Hindu temples and Buddhist temples, and then you also have some very beautiful mosques in this city. So coming to Jogja, I think a lot of people know that it's a very cultural center point in Indonesia. So I would recommend coming and visiting this city because there's just so much to see. And then if you go to Bali, Bali's like going to another country. I lived here for about 3 years before I ever went to Bali because I thought it was just too touristy. And I didn't really want to see that too much, but after going there, I really enjoy it because it feels so different compared to the rest of Indonesia that I've seen. The culture changes because they're all Hindus, and the temples everywhere in the city and in the villages. So amazing. What else? I could go on and on. There's places that I want to go. Raja Ampat, I've not been there yet. And people tell me I have to go. It's so beautiful for snorkeling and seeing the sea life, sharks and turtles and the coral reef. Komodo Island, I've been there 2 times. I'm very lucky to be there. That was a highlight, a bucket list item for me to see the biggest lizards in the world on their own island. And where else? There's so many things to see in Indonesia. I could go on and on. If you're really considering traveling to Indonesia, research it and pick the highlights that you want to see, because maybe you'll miss something if you just come here and try to do it off the cusp of your hand and just travel here and travel there. I would say really research it because there's just so much to see. Well, thank you guys. Those are my top 10s of the weird and the usual, amazing to see in Indonesia. Thanks for watching.